You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where today we're going to be conducting an Ashes post-mortem on the men's side of the game and looking forward to, after the first game, the women's Ashes, which we hope will be an altogether more competitive series. I am Jack Hope, and to go over this I am joined by Max Rowe Brown. Max, how are you doing? How is the crack den?
Hi Jack. The crack den's fine. It's coming along nicely. We're working downstairs at the moment, so it'll be a while before I can have a background behind me that I'm proud of. But I refuse to blur it.
Yeah, and joining us from Adelaide, Australia, is Melinda Farrell. How are you doing, Melinda? Have you enjoyed your Friday? It's the time difference has been a real killer for Max and I, getting up at 7 a.m. for this.
Well, especially if you're sleeping in a crack den, because I can't imagine that comfortable. I'm not in a crack den. I'm in a hotel room. So, I'm still on the road. It's been a long time, but thanks for getting up early for me, guys. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it sets up the whole Friday. I mean, I've watched the sun come up. I've done all my chores. It's nothing but 8 hours of work to look forward to.
Onwards and upwards.
Yeah, Max, what are the listeners for our messages before we get into the cricket?
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that slip of the tongue last time. Listeners for the messages, please do follow and subscribe to the channel on YouTube and click the bell icon so that you can keep up to date with everything we're doing. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the Cricket Pod, and if you want to support us on Patreon, then go to patreon.com/the Cricket Pod, where we've revamped our offering for listeners. So I think we'll be doing some sort of exclusive shows and maybe a bit of Q&A and all that sort of thing. So check those out and
exactly. You can vote.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Yes. Well done, Max. You've got another customer, and you can vote in our Best Male Cricketer of 2021 award, which is you're only eligible to vote in if you're a Patreon or a contributor to this show. So it's very exclusive, very, very exclusive. Let's talk about the Ashes. So we've done, and we said this off air, we've done about 20 shows mainly on how bad England are at batting, and so we don't want to tread that ground too much here. What we haven't necessarily talked about, because most of our guests, all of our guests actually have been based in Europe, although we've had some Australians on, we haven't had anyone actually in Australia. And what I'd like to ask first of all, Melinda, is what's the sort of feeling in Australia? Here, people have been telling the story about how Test cricket is pointless and the whole thing needs to end. But did people in Australia enjoy whacking England? Did it go over well, or were people bored of how bad we were?
I don't think people were bored. I hate to say this because it's awful. I think people felt a bit sorry for England. It got to that point.
Wow.
I was talking to Glenn McGrath at the end of it, and he said, it's just, I do feel a bit sorry for them. And I was like, oh my God, it was brutal. I mean, we've seen 5-0 before, but this kind of felt worse in so many ways. And yes, I think a lot of Australians still enjoy winning, especially because, last summer, Australia on the other end of it, they were beaten by India out here. So, which is a great series as well, a really competitive series. And I think people really embraced India because they enjoyed that competition. But I do think that there is some sympathy here, and I don't know how great that is amongst the population in England, but the stuff that's going on in Australia at the moment, just basket case stuff with border closures, restrictions, everything else. There's so much still going on with all of that now. I think there was a little bit of sympathy as well. I hope there was gratitude that England came. I mean, when you talk about the end of Test cricket, I actually wrote a piece basically saying that if this pandemic keeps going on, I don't think we can realistically expect 5 test series to go ahead. They've tried it 3 times. This is the first one that's actually gone to the 5th test, the only one. So the other 2 were sort of, the last match was abandoned in each case between India and England, although, you know, obviously one's been postponed. It's just been a really difficult tour. And you know, I was saying I went into quarantine on the 21st of October, and I'm still on the road, but I've sort of just left the men's Ashes and come to the women's Ashes. And there's the underlying stress throughout all of it as COVID came in. You know, 2 weeks of quarantine to get into Brisbane. And then once you were there, that was sort of okay, but it just started to unravel a little bit in Adelaide, much more so in Melbourne. And it was starting to look really shaky. By the time I got to Sydney and the amount of testing that was being done, it felt so fraught. And, you know, coaches had gone, there were members of the media were gone. We had that ridiculous situation where there was a stuff up basically, and the net bowlers came in, and then it turned out that 2 net bowlers had returned positive COVID tests as part of their pre-entry clearance, but pre-entry, and they got in and were bowling. So it was like, how's that pre-entry? It was a stuff up. So when all of that was happening, honestly, I thought we're never getting to Hobart. We're just going to be so lucky to get this test out of the way. And then we did finally get to Hobart, but all of this stuff that was going on behind it, it was just this anxiety. And I know I was explaining this to you before, but few people might have read this, but it was at the point, certainly for England in Sydney, where everyone was pretty much getting tested every day. But because of the scarcity of tests and the amount of pressure that was on the system, there was such a delay in getting the results. So at one point, the players were getting a PCR test before they'd even got the results of the previous PCR test. And that what they were then being asked to do was, so that the testing results could get quicker, was to do a different type of test, which was nose and throat swab at once. So basically they would go up your nostril and down your throat as if you're being intubated. And I spoke to one of the players who said, you know, it didn't hurt. It felt bloody horrible, as you can imagine. But the players were stressed because they wanted their family to do it as well. And they're going, no, we can't put, you know, kids through this and family members. So this was the kind of stuff that was just going on all the way through it. And I don't know if you guys have experienced, but I know I was, and I know players were as well. When you get a test, that anxiety of waiting for the result, as well, knowing that if you get a positive result, then you're done, you're stuck there. And for players, that would possibly mean being stuck in a state, missing the next test, you know, maybe if they'd got it in Hobart, missing the flight home, or all of that sort of thing. So there was just so much about it that had a peculiar type of anxiety that was new to me, and I think was really exacerbated for players, some of whom had been living in that kind of environment since early October. And while it might not mitigate some of the genuine problems that I'm sure you've been discussing about England's batting and everything else, I just don't see how athletes can perform at their best when so much crap like that and there's so much anxiety. It just must take a bigger toll, and we might not fully understand that maybe until a bit further down the track. But I genuinely think 5 test series jammed in like that. We know the preparation was a nightmare in the end. Test tours are hard enough as they are. 5 test tours are hard enough as they are. There was no time in between for breaks, for a tour match, for a few days off that you would normally get in a 5 test series like Australia had in 2019 in England. Even though that was quite a compact tour, they still had a couple of tour games. They still had some days off and they still had some freedom. Steve Smith was able to get over his concussion, like other players were able to refresh, all that sort of thing. So for me, everything about this series was just so hard to get it to limp over the line. So I probably maybe there's a bit more sympathy certainly there is for me. I've got a lot of sympathy for the players. Maybe there is a little bit from the Australian public, kind of, because they could see that happening a bit as well. And so maybe that was why there was a bit of maybe just feeling a bit sorry for them, and disappointed that it wasn't the competitive series that people obviously always hope an Ashes series is going to be.
Well, that's a mistake, isn't it? Hoping that the Ashes is going to be competitive in Australia. I mean, it's you know, there's plenty of a large body of evidence to suggest that that's a foolish thing to do. But I mean, it sounds like what you've described as, well, quite eye-opening from my point of view. It's like, you know, we don't know what it's like on the inside, and it does give a frame of reference, doesn't it, for everything that's going on. And then you consider just the sheer volume of cricket that these guys have been playing over the last 2 years. Like, it's been pretty much non-stop since the West Indies came over and did us a favour, and Pakistan came over and did us a favour in those COVID tours in 2020. And you think they barely had a break to the point.
Well, in Australia, just look at Australia in comparison. I mean, they'd played some white ball cricket, yes, but with a lot of different players as well. They'd played 4 tests last summer, and that was all they'd played in 2 years. So
half of them pulled out of the 100 in the IPL because for bubble fatigue reasons, and
then you go win a World Cup, smash the Ashes. It's all right, isn't it?
That's the formula, isn't it? That's the formula.
Well, seven of those choice Australian players pulled out of the white ball tours in the winter here to the Caribbean and Bangladesh, because there were players who had been to the IPL, and so they pulled out of those tours as well. So even though, yes, they did go to the World Cup, some of them, but they've not played anywhere near the volume of cricket and test cricket in particular, and they also haven't travelled. I mean, it still blows my mind that the last time they played an away series was the 2019 Ashes, and that's the only time they've played an away series since Sandpapergate.
Is that partly because they don't think they'll actually ever get back into Australia if they left throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, pretty much. No, look, Australia's a terrible global citizen. Look, at least England can take some sort of moral victory, perhaps, over the fact that they've been.
That's what we exist for now, isn't it? Moral victories.
Yeah,
lording it over people.
We just have parties instead.
The mother of parliaments, all of that. It reminds me a little bit. There's a Kevin Peterson quote. I think it's in the film The Edge, and you don't want to listen to everything Kevin Peterson says. That's a mistake you can make in cricket. But there was something he said that was quite illuminating. It was about the experience of being an England player and why he fell out with Andy Flower, basically. And it was that you get up 200 days a year, you put the tracksuit on, you go to nets, or you go to the game, you play, you go home. And he said you do that for a few years and you just start thinking to yourself, when is this going to end? And the experience that the England players have sort of gone through over the last 18 months or so, it's like that, but on crack. Crack is obviously the theme of this show.
Yeah.
But it must be
a Crack It podcast.
Very good. It must be mentally and physically just exhausting to have to go through the same thing every day, and like everything you do comes with this low level of anxiety, whether that's having a test, waiting for a test, not the cricket here, the COVID tests, and playing the game, which we know is already like quite a mentally taxing and sometimes damaging sport to be involved in the first place. And then I think we were saying this off air as well, you don't get any of the perks or any of the bits that relieve the stress along the way. The fact that you get to invite your friends and your family along to the test matches at home, and you get to travel and see these amazing places and explore hobbies and give yourself exposure to cultures that you otherwise wouldn't interact with. None of that happens. You are literally waking up in a hotel, putting your tracksuit on, going to the ground, coming home. For at least a portion of this time as well, they weren't allowed to have dinner and breakfast at the same table. They had to go downstairs. I think probably thinking back to 2020 now. They had to go downstairs, and they all had individual tables. So they didn't even get to interact over meals. The only time they had any social or any time to actually socialize physically with people was I suppose at nets and in the huddle before the match. It's quite tiring.
even for us, and I don't compare, like there's no comparison to the level, but it was probably the least social tour that I've covered, where the times when you actually met up with other people were really few and far between, because I was so worried because I was doing some work for BT, and we lost people. We lost camera operators. We had 3 different producers in Sydney because they kept either being a close contact or getting COVID. We're going through, and runners. It was unbelievable the way that they kept that broadcast on air. And the tech manager came up to me in Sydney and just said, because we lost Glenn McGrath for the Sydney test as well. Ali Mitchell had to stay in Melbourne because she was doing they decided to split their team, Channel 7, because it was just too difficult having everyone together, and they were trying to protect the broadcast. And when the tech manager came up to me and said, go lock yourself in a cupboard at any time you're not here doing stuff, because if you and David Gower go down, we are expletive. Right?
You can say it on here, it's fine.
If I wasn't already on edge, I can tell you I was then. And I wouldn't even go in the press box until the match started. I was basically going from the nets to my hotel room and like get Uber Eats, whatever it was, because I wouldn't go out and get any food. And I was just doing, I was nets, hotel room. And then when we were in the press box, it was press box, hotel room, press box, hotel room. And that would, you normally, at the very least, these are people, mates that I haven't seen for a long time. There were a couple of times when we did get to socialize, and it got a bit easier in Hobart, actually, because we had a couple of days off essentially. But
you're welcome.
There's not as much COVID, lots more outside, so it felt a little bit more relaxed down there. But yeah, it was absolutely unlike any tour that I've done before. So maybe that's why, just when you times that by 100, it's why I can feel perhaps some empathy to what that must be like when you take out the fun elements of it, and it should be fun. Still, it must be difficult. And then when you're getting battered and you're getting held responsible for all the ills of English cricket, everything from they're using too many wangers in the nets to, I don't know, the county championship not being in August.
Darren
but
Stevens
all of it
existing.
is fault.
Yeah, I want to get Darren Stevens on the show and ask him why he's killed English cricket, Max.
Well, I was reading quite an interesting. I think it was Barney Ronay in the Guardian. He actually he was writing about why we need to stop blaming Darren Stevens for the downfall of red ball cricket. Apparently, at one point, I think it was possibly around the 3rd test, Darren Stevens actually had to put out something on Twitter to say, "Can you please stop bringing me into this?" Because so many people had been talking about Darren Stevens on an April getting people out.
But can we move the conversation a little bit to maybe what England can do? So we were reacting to England being bad. Is there anything, Max, you think, as the county cricket aficionado of the cricket, albeit the wrong type of county cricket, the stupid blast and not the 4-day stuff?
I've got the full membership this year.
Oh, have you?
Okay.
Right. Well, yeah. I look forward to being invited along in April to watch the season opener on the 7th.
Keep your diary clear.
Yeah. To what extent do you think that the structural issues are as severe as people say? And the flip side of that is well, no, answer that question first. Let's do one question at a time.
Yeah. Well, I think what I would say is that I'm sort of taking, after a week or so of being constantly bludgeoned by England losing and somewhat meekly on occasion, I'm starting to wonder what it is that's made sort of this series in particular such a catalyst for, like, everything's gone wrong, we need to rip everything up and start again. Because like I said earlier, England losing 4-0 in Australia is not an unknown event. Like, it happened pretty quickly after England won the Ashes at home and in Australia. I mean, very quickly turned around and lost it all again. It happens reasonably regularly. So it's interesting, what it is this time, and especially when you talk about sort of the backdrop of COVID and how difficult everything's been, as to why suddenly England's performances here have been such a, such an eye opener for everything needing to change. And there are obvious issues, and people will obviously use the 100 as a stick to beat everything with, and some of that rings true, right? Like there's obvious focus on white ball stuff. Owen Morgan, in terms of the white ball team, when it comes to England winning the World Cup, basically got everything he wanted, right? All the analyst work you couldn't dream of with Nathan Lehman, and all the focus of trying to work out how to play and that kind of thing, and it bore fruit eventually. Fair enough. And I don't think the Test team gets that kind of input, does it? You go back to blaming the county championship for everything, but ultimately, maybe don't play some of it in April. Maybe try using a different ball. Those are things you can try, but I don't think ripping it up and starting again is necessarily the problem. Like, we managed to get a decent Test team out of it not that long ago with ostensibly the same system, right? So I think some of it is going to be about the players. Some of that probably goes back to, what do you want to do when you go through? What are you focusing on? What's your skill set you're focusing on? Is it trying to be a Test player, or is it trying to be, number one white ball player in the world and go and get loads of money in the IPL? That's probably something you think about. Like, it's just,
you do get quite a lot of money for being an England Test player.
You do.
Let's just be.
Is there as much of an opportunity to do that? I suppose is the question, because you've got how many central contracts to bid for, to get for, and then how many T20 franchises are there in the world that you might be able to get a reasonable amount of money from. So maybe there needs some sort of incentivization kind of thing. But I mean, really, the very basic things that England need to do are not have a selector who selects all of the teams and coaches the teams for all of the types of cricket that England play, because that's obviously not sustainable. We've talked about that before. We know it just can't work, can it? Even if you're just selecting the Test side and coaching the Test side, that's probably too much anyway, let alone all the focus you've had on white ball cricket and selecting that side and all that kind of thing. Split them up, split up the red ball and the white ball, get a dedicated red ball coach, and get back to having different selectors, so that if you are going to go down England's route of, okay, here's Zach Crawley, there's something about him, I think we should put him in the Test side because he looks good. If you're going to not go with data because you don't think county championship averages mean anything, okay, that's fine if that's the approach you want to take. But you can't do that and have a man who's the selector and the coach who's with the team the entire time, because you can't go around county championship looking for people who you think have something about them. So the approach that England take is kind of logically opposed, really, I suppose, to what they're trying to achieve. So I think that would be a starting point. Like, let's not rip everything up at once. Let's try that for now, see if we get anywhere with that, and then maybe if we need to start thinking about deeper change and ripping things up and having whatever Aggers says about having 100 for the county championship or some strange theory like that. Try that if nothing else works, but let's do it a step at a time.
Don't try that, even if nothing else works. Just pack it up before we start going down any of those routes.
Well, that's so a couple of points about that I think are interesting. Is Australia have gone down that pathway before, where where say for example, where captain is a selector as well, because that's the other thing. So Australia, they've flipped back and forth on this whole idea. I think there's obviously that thing that that the captain should get the team that they want, and yes, that's in there. I don't know if the captain has to be an official selector to have his views really valued on what team he wants. But I do think it gives him a little layer of protection, perhaps making it easier with players, but also just a little bit of protection from the scrutiny for decisions as well. And I actually don't mind that, because I think that the captain has got enough pressure on all different things as well. Why give them the pressure of the added pressure of the title of selector as well? So I think they can still have their views obviously held. I mean, Pat Cummins is going to have his views held on who he thinks should be in the team. I can certainly tell you Tim Payne did. But that's one thing. And Australia, but they did a good job getting George Bailey in. And he's come out of this series looking really well, because every time, they brought in a new player.
Like a genius. Yeah. We have people emailing us nominating him as player of the series.
Yeah. I've heard that a few times.
Yeah. And it's not just the picks, is it, as well? It's you brought in like Joe Richardson, took a fifer, and then be like, all right, thank you very much. Done your job. Scott Boland, step up.
But that's what was really good, was that I think the communication, and perhaps because that's a thing where, because George is more recently retired, has really good relationships with the players and understands where the players are coming from. There was a fair bit of, like, even when Usman Khawaja was talking about, being really philosophical about scoring twin hundreds at the SCG, and then, thought it could be quite likely that he would not play in Hobart. And he was kind of okay with that, because he's been dropped from the Australian side 7 times in the past, and he knows what it's like going in and out of the side. So he had that empathy for where Harris was. So that all that communication with the selectors seems to be, at the moment, particularly with George there, in a pretty good spot. So that's obviously something that has worked quite well, and I think that helps with players coming in and going out, because the thing with players and selections, isn't it, is that you want players to feel a certain amount of pressure, so that there's not complacency, that their spot's just there, it's all the time. But you also don't want them going over into the anxiety of, oh my God, if I make one mistake here, I'm going to be dropped. So as sort of finding, I think, the balance between there, and as someone who's played the game recently, I think probably George has been able to handle and manage all of that really quite well. But to your point about too with county cricket, I've had some really interesting conversations during this series with some former players, and there are quite a few of them who think that England's issues with batting will be seen in Australia in the not too distant future. That it is basically a trend that's going. Australia is saved, unlike England, because of its really long summers. So, and I do think a lot of England's issues with the game comes because there's, so many, well, there's obviously so many teams now, there's so many different formats, and the summer is actually quite finite. It's not a lot of really good weather. So in Australia, when they put the big bash in the middle and they split the Sheffield Shield, and a load of people were saying it's going to ruin Test cricket. There's no cricket being played in the height of summer. There's no Shield cricket being played when you want to be able to select players for Test cricket. All of those sorts of things have been said here. But the difference is, although there is some seasonal difference between, playing at the Gabba in spring as opposed to late autumn, it's not the same as the difference between playing at Headingley in say April and August. Although sometimes I'm not sure that there's that much difference, because I've been there both times.
That's definitely true. It can be. You can get on. I mean, you are more likely to have a better cricket surface in July and August, but sometimes they're bad.
Sometimes they are bad. But that's the thing about Australia, because of the length of the summer and everything else. I think that just you tend to have better conditions and more consistent seasons, so that the splitting of the Shield hasn't harmed things in the same way, because you're able to sort of have almost 2 seasons, I guess. It's still not ideal, and there are a lot of people saying that these problems, the same things about prioritization of white ball cricket, the big bash is, it's got pretty fat now, it's bloated, and that there's a lot
too much KFC.
Oh, don't even start me on the bucket heads. I'm gonna get rid of the bucket heads. I've been talking to people because you see, they hand out thousands of the things. It's just the worst kind of waste. They don't even give you any sun protection. It's just a bucket on your head. It's I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna start a campaign. Yeah, so look, there's some things to mull over, but the other thing is that because England's the only one in the Northern Hemisphere, they end up touring and playing more overseas than anyone else, and I do think that they get knackered. There's just too much. There's just too much. Well, I don't know. I think we're in danger. We're squeezing the golden goose so much. We're in danger of strangling it.
Yeah, Max, what changes are we going to make? Everyone else has got a manifesto. I feel like we should have a manifesto. What would you change about county cricket? What's your 3 points? Kill Darren Stevens.
No,
torture and kill Darren Stevens.
Darren Stevens for the England.
Pick Darren Stevens.
We need a testimonial. We picked Darren
if you wanted to be contrarian, you could say that England are doing it wrong. Everyone else in the world is making Test cricket more like their domestic cricket. They're making it spin more in India and Sri Lanka. It's the pitches are drier and worse in West Indies.
Well, I mean,
maybe England just need to play all their Test matches in April.
What's the stat? Darren Stevens has got, I think it's 273 wickets at an average of about 18.
Yeah, Darren Stevens is definitely not the problem. He's a good player.
Yeah.
He's a good player. He's a good batter. He's a good bowler.
Well, that was the other thing in that article I read.
There's definitely nothing detrimental
about having him in the WhatsApp group about how difficult it is to play in England called Steve-O's Gonna Get You.
Getcha.
Yeah. And he got Marnus Labuschagne out twice and in the county championship this year. So, England aren't the only people struggling with the Darren Stevens dibbly dobblers. I mean, they do need to play more of it in the summer. I mean, that's clear enough, isn't it? Because it isn't, necessarily a great experience playing county championship in April. I mean, we spoke to Chris Nash on one of the after one of the days of the Test cricket, and one of the things he was saying was just like, it's shit going and playing a game of county championship in April. It's not fun. You don't want to do it because, well, for obvious reasons, like it's cold and stupid.
Rob Keane had a column that I thought was really interesting about the quality of pitches as well. And that a lot of that has changed with the drainage that they have now, the super drainage. The pitches are softer, and I found his point really interesting as well. I mean, the whole thing, when Australia lost to India last year, and bearing in mind that was 2 times in 3 summers that they'd lost a series to India, there was a fair bit of doom and gloom here, and people saying, look, is this Sheffield Shield fit for purpose? The Big Bash is ruining it. Why can't we bring players in from the Sheffield Shield who can, bat against these essentially, India's B team that was brought in because of the injuries that happened early in the series. So there is something in, losing a big series where it is all doom and gloom, and sometimes you might just have to let the dust settle a little bit too, and just sort of see how much of this is coming from the hurt, where we just want to, throw arrows or fire arrows at everybody, and what is the long-term solution, and there will be changes. I'm sure there will be, I think, because this loss was so big that I'm sure it'll cause some ramifications in the short term and possibly the long term. And maybe it needed to be really bad. That was the other thing we said. Maybe in the end, maybe it had to be bad, because if they'd ended up winning in Hobart, for example, then it would be really easy to go back and say, well, they did win 1 test and they came back and they showed some fight.
Yeah, well, what was the stat you said, Jack? If we'd won in Hobart, it would have been like England's best series down under.
It would have been the joint second best series in our lifetimes.
Yeah, exactly. So, maybe.
And they actually nearly got to the point where they were favourites, I think. I mean, the bookmakers were saying they were favourites on the Sunday morning our time.
Yeah, they obviously don't watch enough cricket.
But they were 70 for no loss, and it was like, come on, they 200 with 10 wickets.
This is
all out 56 runs later. It's
it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. But Australia had a really awful loss there to South Africa. I think that was the last time a test was played, when Kyle Abbott ran through them and took.
Yeah, but I mean, that was sort of who was playing there, like Peter Neville and Adam Voges. So it's a very different Australia side to what we're used
but
to.
there were a number of players like Nick Maddison, Callum Ferguson came in for 1 test. then they were all dropped. Australia dropped loads of players, and it was like that was meant to be the nadir and the real bottom. And James Sutherland, the CEO, basically walked into the dressing room and gave them all what for, and it was seen as like, you know, really bad time for Australian cricket. So it's funny that things can shift around a bit, sometimes quite quickly. So hopefully it does for England.
Yeah, I'd like them to. The only thing I'd like is them to try a different ball earlier in the season.
Yeah,
I don't think the combination of difficult pitches and very, very difficult ball help in April, May, and September. So maybe just try the Kookaburra for them.
Yeah, well, Australia started doing those rounds in the Sheffield Shield with the Duke ball. Really, really funny because I remember doing the interview with Ricky Ponting. God, I sound like such a wanker name dropper, but I remember it really, I remember it really clearly.
Me and Ricky, we were having a beer.
No,
definitely
not.
I was around his house actually with family barbecue.
No. But we were doing a post-match piece at Trent Bridge, and after the disaster of Trent Bridge for Australia, after the wonderful exploits of Stuart Broad, Ben Stokes et al. And he went on this massive rant in this interview that we did, this sort of post-match analysis piece. And he was really strong about this is embarrassing for Australia. They've got to start playing with the Duke's ball in the Sheffield Shield. They've got to start doing this sort of stuff. And then they started to do like that rant of his actually made it back to a lot of places in Australia. And then I think they sort of started looking at doing some of that stuff, trying to get some more experience with different balls. Just, you know, so sometimes these rants that various ex-players who have influence, they sometimes do actually end up changing some things. So
you've got Ricky Ponting, we've got Rob Key. It's the
basic
problem solver. Everyone likes Rob Key.
But they do, but not for his intellect, is it?
Right, shall we? I want to revisit.
He's
Well, no, I'm not. Yeah, that's probably come out the wrong way. I'm not saying he's not smart. I'm saying people don't like Rob Key because of his. People don't like Rob Key because, you know, for the genius quips and things. They like him because he seems like a nice guy and is one of the people. Chap. You know, you go down to the T20 finals there, and Rob Key's coming along doing his bit for Sky, and goes and he got up. Well, I was there. He went and got all the balls off the stewards that they'd confiscated that people had dropped on the pitch and just started lobbing them back into the crowd. That's why people like Rob Key, because he's the good guy.
He is a good guy. I imagine Ricky Ponting doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I want to revisit to wrap up the men's Ashes. Revisit some predictions. Max, I can't remember what yours was. I remember mine was 3-0 or 4-0, so I win. Melinda, you said 2-2. Disappointed with that?
No, because predictions I feel like they're always meaningless. I don't think I have ever predicted anything correctly in my entire career. So, you know, I like to think that basically I'm just keeping up to my own standards.
Yeah,
you're here to write about what happens, not to tell people what's going to happen.
I get angry messages about my predictions. When I said KL Rahul wouldn't hit another 50 last summer, that was
a great shout, though, wasn't it?
It was, but it made me infamous in certain circles of a very specific part of cricket Twitter. And the other thing I wanted to quickly get your thoughts on was player of the series, Max. If you pick one person.
So that's difficult because I think because for so many
Scott Boland won the official one, didn't he?
No, it was Travis Head.
Oh, did he? What did Scott Boland
Travis
win?
Head,
He won
I think,
something.
won player of the series because he was the top run scorer in the series, and I think Travis Head probably does take it for me, just because of, especially from, in comparison. We'll remind everyone again what I said before, that I didn't really expect him to do anything.
Yeah, you did.
It's for where it came from, and that
forgettable cricketer Travis Head.
Yeah, him in the side. It was a question between him and Khawaja, wasn't it? Like that was a selection issue, and he comes out and stamps authority with 100 in Brisbane, and then backed up with another one later on. So I think Travis Head probably does take it for me, and those runs were important as well. They were they took the game away from England, but I mean so many Australia players did well in that series. I mean the bowlers in particular. So it's a tough one to choose, but yeah, Travis Head I think probably for me.
Melinda, would you go for someone different or?
Yeah, it's hard to know when you talk about the earlier centuries. I think the pitches were really bowler friendly in this series. Like people who have played on them for many years told me that they've never seen pitches this bowler friendly as like around Australia for fast bowlers. They've not seen pitches that good like ever, certainly not for a long time. So I think that puts also into context Travis Head's innings in Hobart. When you go back and look at it, I think Hobart was actually really, really hard to bat on. I mean, that ball from Scott Boland that got Joe Root out. No one in this. That
should have been illegal.
It should. Like, it's the sort of ball that would I don't know, kick kittens and curse rainbows. It was so mean. And there was nothing, But so I think that puts perhaps Travis Head's performance into some real context there. It's as I say, it's about his game. I thought Mitchell Starc had a brilliant series. Possibly, I want to say it's his best series, and maybe it was sort of helped a bit having 2 pink ball games helped, but the fact that he played as much as he did, and the runs that he scored as well, they probably weren't as valuable as the runs that Travis Head scored in the context of the match. They were valuable, but they not quite as valuable. But I thought he had a really, really good series as well. And the way he went in the end, like the other one who was one of the MVPs was Cameron Green, and it was a real coming of age, the old coming of age series. But it really was for him. It was a series where we'd seen his bowling do well, we'd seen his batting do well. We saw all of it come together in what I think is almost a frightening package for the future. If he stays fit and keeps getting better, then he's a really incredible
player.
Yeah,
he's a pretty tasty player. Yeah, I'm going to say Scott Boland. I just he only played 3 of the tests, but.
It's a good story, isn't it?
Would he get 18 wickets at 10 or something like that?
And
it's a great
average
story. I'm a
10,
sucker.
9.8 in the end or something ridiculous.
Yeah, as Cameron, who comes on the podcast, would say, he was bowling against England's Make-A-Wish Foundation batting lineup, but what a wish if that was what he wished for. It was such good fun, and it was sort of at times it was nice that it was happening. It was one of those occasions where you were like, oh, well, if we are going to lose 10 wickets at 56, at least that guy got some of them. So there's that. Max, the only thing we haven't touched upon is Joe Root and the boys having a beer. Do you have anything to say on that?
Grow up, everyone.
Grow up.
What a ridiculously blown out of proportion story that was. Even the ECB don't give a shit. That's like the only thing they care about is the fact that Graham Thorpe
lit a
cigar and then filmed it, and it was actually his fault in the end anyway. It wasn't even a noise complaint, was it?
Done.
It was because he smoked a cigar inside. So, I think there's nothing wrong with the guys enjoying a beer, and it was nice to see that the camaraderie was there after the game. It went on for a while, but there was a
lot going on.
Day-night test anyway, wasn't it? And they had drinks in the changing rooms, and then moved back to the hotel. And I think after all we've heard about the fun of isolation and all the bubble stuff, I think 5 guys having a few beers at a table in a hotel is not a story.
why were the Australian team still in whites? Travis Head was wearing his baggy green. There were a few things in this that
because they had
were kind of incongruous.
They have traditional drinks in the dressing rooms after the series. So they would have, I assume, some of them would have just cracked straight onto those after the game in their whites. And then I think that sort of wound up at about 2:30 in the morning, and then they bust back to the hotel and carried on. So I mean, if you go and have a shower at that point, it's end of the night, innit? You know that's curtains.
Yeah.
So.
Nathan Lyon didn't really do anything in the entire test. So
no,
it wasn't like
he didn't need a shower.
BO issues. So it was all right for him.
Neither did England's batsman, so that's fine too.
I did like Graham Thorpe. Taking the filming, I don't know what his thought process was when he got it out. Yeah, for the lawyers, like he was some kind of Cricketers for Justice campaigner who was trying to start a movement. Look at these police officers harassing the poor cricketers who were just outside at 6 a.m, smoking cigars in the bar. You know, it was I don't know. It was strange, but
I mean, Graham Thorpe might lose his job over it, but Graham Thorpe should probably lose his job over it being England's batting coach.
I think he's interviewing or very close to being appointed as the Middlesex.
Yeah,
coach.
He's trying to get out.
I don't think. Yeah, he's long for the world of international cricket. Should we move on? Sorry, I was halfway through a sip of water there, and then right, Max. Max, the women's Ashes. Is underway. Do you have a summary for yesterday's match? We're recording this on Friday morning. I don't know whether we'll put it out today, tomorrow, Sunday, or Monday. I haven't done the scheduling yet. It is currently, I think, 2-0 to Australia. I can't remember. So let's talk through this because we have to do this every time we go through a women's series. There are 3 T20s, there are 3 ODIs, all worth 2 points each. A Test match worth 4 points, which I have to add this up: 2, 4, 6, 10. 16 points. Is my maths right? There's 16 points on the line. Mm-hmm. It's 2-0 to Australia. Max, can you quickly summarise yesterday's game, and then we'll talk about that and what that means or how that sets the series up overall.
Yeah. So England. First game of the Ashes series being a T20 international in Adelaide, and it all looked to start with like it was going quite well for England. Danny Wyatt in particular getting England up to a very respectable total of 169 for 4, which, given England's bowling is probably their strong point in this side, they would have fancied themselves to defend, and sort of early into the Australian innings, they would probably have been backing that point of view, even though only 1 wicket had fallen. Australia still had a bit to do, and Tahlia McGrath did a bit and a half, having taken 2 wickets in the space of 3 balls, was it, in the first innings to remove some of England's set batsmen. She then set about dismantling all of England's bowlers in a pretty astounding 91 off 49 balls to see Australia romp home with 3 overs to spare. It was a pretty devastating performance, what you might describe as a day out. It was quite an announcement.
Yeah, so the kind of backdrop or the build-up to this series from an Australian point of view seems to have been that there's a little bit of worry around some of the senior players' form. I think there's been a couple of injuries. Melinda Farrell, Tahlia McGrath is obviously a force of nature. Is there somebody else that will stand up for Australia here, or is she carrying the weight of a nation on her shoulders?
No, not at all. I think that's the scary thing about this Australian side is that, you know, they've been without some of their best players. The reason that Meg Lanning was opening the batting with Elisa Healy was that Beth Mooney had fractured her jaw, getting throwdowns in the nets. And if you want to know how tough she is, she fractured her jaw on Tuesday. She had surgery on Wednesday. I was at training this morning on Friday and she was in the nets, just basically getting the confidence back. So getting sort of soft throwdowns, gradually building up to just sort of getting slightly shorter balls, but just all gentle kind of stuff. But she was in the freaking nets on Friday and she broke her jaw on Tuesday. That blows my mind. So you know, Australia lose the player of the series from the T20 World Cup a couple of years ago, and one of their most consistent players who had a brilliant WBBL as well. And then Meg Lanning puts herself up to open. They lose Elisa Healy. But then Tahlia McGrath, she is a heck of a cricketer. She really is. She's sort of been on the scene now for a little while, and she had a really good series against India, so about 6 months ago. I lose track of time, but recently, and she played really well in that series as well. Had a bit of an up and down WBBL, but there's been no doubt about her all-round capabilities. And it was one of those nights. I asked her, has this ever clicked for you in a game like this, where just everything came together? And she said no, it hadn't. So that was her bowling was so important because you're right. England had 2 set batters in Nat Siver and Danny Wyatt, and they were batting beautifully. I mean, that was a record target set by England against Australia. And 17th over, you've got 2 set batters ready to take England home, and then all of a sudden she comes in and bowls 2 Yorkers, bang bang. She set up, but she doesn't even bowl Yorkers really well. She tries to practice them, but she's always,
so annoying, isn't it? You get someone like that just comes in and bowls 2 perfect Yorkers. I don't really bowl Yorkers very well.
Yeah. One of them has a bit of out sweep. Like, come on, man. So that just changed things, the complexity, I think, of that innings, because with those 2 still at the crease, England might have added another 20 runs. But yeah, her batting. There was
Which should have just meant that she'd have scored 100 instead of 91.
Well, that's Meg Lanning's fault. She selfishly scored too many runs in the last couple of overs. I think it's like denied a century. But there was one, like this flat batted pull shot she played. There was so many, timing, power. She's got the ability, uncanny, to just split the field wherever she goes. There was one just flat pull shot for 6 that was just brute force as well. So, but what she did helpfully at the end, she did helpfully give some advice to England when we spoke to her after the match about how to get her out, because she's not been out. That's her third T20 national. She doesn't have an average.
No.
She hasn't out yet. So we are sort of
177 for none.
Yeah, amazing. We asked Tammy Beaumont about that. She's like, yeah, well, hopefully we'll give her an average in this series. It'll be a pretty high one. and when she was asked, how would you get Tahlia McGrath out in a T20 international? And she said, anything short, anything wide and short, I'm rubbish at. And full tosses, I'm rubbish at them. I can't believe I just said that. And she's just so she just sort of said,
she knows what she's doing. She's playing an absolute blinder there. Come on. Short and wide and full tosses. Yes, please. Get my eye in next time.
It was really funny.
No one's falling for that.
But there was before that, there was all the talk was of Elise Perry being left out, which still seems probably inconceivable to a lot of people. But her batting in T20s just hasn't probably been aggressive enough with a high enough strike rate for a while now. And Australia have got some other more aggressive options.
Dinosaur.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Well, yeah. She'll be back for the ODIs and the test, of course, I reckon. But we might be getting our first glimpse of a post-Perry era.
Possibly. I mean, I was going to say, I think it's quite an interesting series from both points of view, because it feels to me in the last, say, 5-10 years, that Australia started to take women's cricket a lot more seriously than everyone else, professionalised it and got very good, started to beat England. I think England won the first 2 points-based series, and then Australia have won or retained all of the series since. And I think we've seen something similar over the last 2 years, probably in England. It's had a much higher profile. Obviously, the 100 helps massively on that front. But I think there are basically a bigger pool of professional women's cricketers to pick from. And I think maybe, or from an England point of view, I was sort of hoping that this might be where we start to see them be a little bit more competitive with the Australian side, who I think have dominated recently. But yeah, the fact that Australia are now in a situation where they're moving on from that first generation of really professional women's cricketers is another scary proposition. Do you think, Melinda, that England have got much of a chance here, or do you think in the kind of arms race I'm describing that Australia is still a step ahead?
Well, probably by the time this podcast goes out, with the
yeah.
But I guess that the challenge for England after that is to pick themselves up from knowing that they actually put a really like that. That's the best I've seen England had against Australia in, I don't know, a long time. It was really good. And Danny Wyatt, when Jess Johnson came onto Boland, she just belted the first 2 balls straight over the longest boundary. It was like, hello. There was a lot to like about her and Tammy Beaumont's innings in particular. But the scary thing for them will be, God, we really gave them a great target. And they got there with 3 overs to spare and only 1 wicket down. So that's, I think, going to be the hardest thing for England to go, right, we can't let ourselves get spooked by this, because once you do, then it goes down. That there will hopefully for England be times when they will find some, weaknesses in the Australian lineup. They certainly found some weaknesses in the bowling, and that's a good place to start. So they were able to do that. They just got to find a way to get Meg Lanning and Tahlia McGrath out. And they've got some really good bowlers. I'm a massive fan of Sophie Eccleston in particular, and others as well. So look, it's a long time. They both had series against India last year that I thought were quite a similar level of competitiveness. They both won, England and Australia, against India, but also there were times when India did really well against them. And I wondered if that might be a little bit of a gauge. But yeah, look, we'll see. Australia have just come off a big WBBL season that finished a couple of months ago. And their one-day competition as well. So there's a fair bit of cricket that's sort of been played. So they should be in a good spot. And they desperately want to win that World Cup, because that is the one big piece of silverware missing.
Can we ask for a prediction?
I hate you guys so much. Oh my God. I hate you so much. Oh God. Okay, what do we say? 16 points. All right, I'm going to say that Australia are going to win 10-6. There you go. Pull that out of the air.
10-6. Max, what do you think?
12-4 to Australia. Let's be slightly more pessimistic here.
12-4. Wow,
Yeah.
You've been watching too much men's cricket, Max.
I have, yeah.
The 12-4 score, I've just got it up here, was the score in the last one, so it's not inconceivable. I think England are.
Well, the test is big, isn't it? That's the thing. So many points up with the test. So
I'm actually a little bit more optimistic. I think that it's, sometimes you set a good score in a T20 on a flat deck, and then it gets chased down really easily, and it feels like, or it looks like, it's a complete disaster. But actually, as you said in the summary, Max, Tahlia McGrath had a great day, a career day maybe, and you come into an unstoppable force in a short format match, and you're cooked, aren't you? But I think England will come back. What do I reckon? I reckon they will win 1 T20, draw the test, and probably win 1 ODI. So that's 6, isn't it? 10-6. Yeah.
So we're on the same page.
Yeah, there we go.
That means you've got your prediction wrong, because you've agreed with me.
Right, we are going to wrap up this episode of the Cricket Podcast. Thank you for joining us, Melinda. Is there anything you want to plug, or let people know where they can find you?
No, don't people know who I am? No, I'll be writing a lot of stuff for Sporting News. I've still got the YouTube channel. It's just basically I've just had too much on to have been doing as much as I would like to have been doing on the YouTube channel, but we're still around. But yeah, definitely Sporting News. I'll be writing a lot of stuff for them, and hopefully getting over to England very soon.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it won't be long. Things are all normal here. The Prime Minister got
Yeah,
a bit of
no,
trouble.
I'm
He's
okay.
cancelled COVID.
All you need is a prime ministerial scandal to end all
Yeah.
restrictions. It's very easy.
No, don't worry. We have our own here as well. No, I'm hoping that I will be over there in a few months' time. So any beers that you owe me for doing this podcast is ready.
Cash them in.
Yeah, no problem. We look forward to it. In the crack.
It might be less of a crack den by then, with any luck.
It's been a crack den for quite a long time, Max. Thank you very much for listening. We can be found at the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. In the show notes, you can find a link to our Patreon, patreon.com/the Cricket Pod. Head over there, join our merry bandwagon of people who donate money to us. Max, I think that's everything. Do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.